That picture startles me every time. Honestly, I gotta get over it. I don't know what I'm looking at. All right, time for Here's the Deal, and we've got lots to talk about tonight. Joining us, Shachi Curl, Aaron MacArthur, and Dara Parker. You're the exec director of Community, just in case people aren't overly familiar with you. Let's start off with 9/11. I knew this day was coming. Obviously, everybody does. It's in the calendar. My husband's a firefighter, so it resonates in my house. But this morning, when I looked at my Facebook page, it was loaded with people talking about, I remember exactly where I was, and I thought, wow, 12 years on, this still really resonates with people. How about you, Shachi?
I think it resonates because I was working in media. I was a young journalist at the time. So, of course, it's one of those things where we all remember what were we doing. It's also one of those what were you doing events or memories because it unfolded live on television. So that is a really indelible and tragic, horrible image. And, of course, this time of year, those images keep getting played over and over again. So from that perspective, it's like, of course, we all remember it. But in terms of a moment of reflection, I mean, if we're talking about death or violence against Canadians or murder of Canadians, for me, a day that resonates far more is the day that Air India Flight 329 blew up, over the skies, because there were many, that was the worst case of mass murder for Canada. So the point being that I think for other people, there are other days that resonate just as much as a day of reflection.
Right, but isn't that interesting? Because the Air India bombing did not spark as much security at airports as 9/11 did. Not even close.
No, and this, in the 12 years since Air India, or since 9/11, I mean, all the security measures that have been put in place, I certainly don't feel any safer flying or feel that I'm protected anymore going through airports.
To me, it's a bigger question about why there's so much media attention on violent tragedy versus deaths that take place in the global sphere every single year. So almost 3,000 people died, irrefutably a tragedy on 9/11, and yet for me, I think the fact that, one, it was a violent tragedy, and two, it took place in a developed country, a Western developed country, it garners more media attention than it deserves.
And is that because we put more value on human life, or we think we're more precious?
Because Western people put more value on human life? I absolutely don't think that's true. So I think, do we live in a little bubble where we think we're much more protected and safe?
In terms of violent crime, in terms of political things unfolding, we don't live in a country where governments change on a dime or where governments are attacking us if we don't agree with what people are saying. We have very, very nice lives in North America. We have very nice lives in Western Europe, and that's a big piece of it. So yes, when it happens, but I think it's also something generational. I think that 9/11 will be to our generation what the Halifax bombing in the First World War was to a generation of Canadians, or what Pearl Harbor was to a generation of Americans. It was sudden, it was unexpected, and I think that's the other piece of it. It's the shock. War, I think, even for the people who are experiencing it, people get fatigued. This is something we didn't see coming.
No, and it really literally unfolded in the space of a few hours. It was like a made-for-television disaster, and I don't mean to sound...
You have to remember, it was the first time America had ever been attacked by terrorist organizations on its own soil. So that's why it becomes such a huge issue and has become a huge issue for 12 years. I do think the American government, though, has used 9/11 to make sure that its citizens stay afraid of the rest of the world, and that's something that we have not talked about nearly enough.
Well, and if 9/11 was fresher, if 9/11 was only 2 years ago, they'd have been all over Syria already, don't you think?
I think that's one of the most interesting points, is that I think the world is more war-weary now, and we're seeing that evidenced with the American response and the UK response to going into Syria.
And isn't it interesting that we had situations where we arguably rushed into Iraq, and I mean, we were all there, we all remember that debate, and Afghanistan, there was justification for it, but the idea that we're not going in, or the Americans and the rest of European leaders are not wanting to go into Syria to uphold a convention that was passed by world leaders and has been standing for 80 years around not using chemical weapons.
But that's all based on our doubt on the weapons of mass destruction argument that they made that was proven inaccurate.
Been there, done that. It's tough for people to get over.
It is, yeah. All right, let's move on to hydro rates. We had a discussion off the top of the show. Hydro rates going up. My sources at Hydro say no matter what they tell the government. Look, we need this much money. You're going to have to do this and this. Government of the day says, yeah, we can't do that because we won't be reelected. So, you know, in the end, it's the consumer that gets burned because the government is trying to, you know, get themselves reelected. Are you?
It's an interesting one because you'll hear all three sides of it. So the NDP will justifiably, outrageously say, look, this is crazy. Taxpayers cannot afford a 26% increase. And of course, today it's okay. At the end of the day, it's not 26%. We don't know what it's going to be. But we know that hydro rates have to go up. The NDP froze those rates in the 90s. We heard Mr. Horgan talking about why that happened. I would say if you know you're going to have some costs over the years because of things are aging or amortization, wouldn't you plan for that? Wouldn't you build that into rates? But the Liberals also kept those rates artificially low over all those years, and they can't continue to keep using that as an excuse.
I know, what happened to putting away money for a rainy day rather than deferring payments and having the debt get larger?
I think politics showed up. But I mean, for me, yes, we need to pay what energy costs. It's a finite resource, and I'm okay with that. The one flag for me is for low-income folks who are going to be disproportionately affected by this, which I don't include myself. As a middle-class person, I can afford that 26% rate hike, and I'm okay with that. I think there needs to be policy provisions in place to consider how this is going to affect low-income.
Right, but a lot of people would say it's not because energy costs so much that the rates are going up. That's not necessarily at the core of this. Why this is happening is because the infrastructure is aging and hasn't been looked after for years. I was told that some of the dams up north still have Soviet brass plates on them, you know, because they supplied those material years ago and they haven't been, I mean, we've got to fix this stuff.
There is billions of dollars in work that needs to be done at dams all over British Columbia. Mica Dam, Revelstoke Dam needs work. The Northwest Transmission Line needs to be fixed. All the LNG projects that Christy Clark keeps talking about require huge amounts of electricity. All of this stuff has to be paid for. How?
But isn't that embedded within the energy cost? So when we talk about that, we can't separate the resource from how we receive it,
well,
right?
And
so
it also speaks to shifting priorities. I mean, for a while it was all IPP all the time. It was all going to be independent power projects. Now it's LNG, and goodness knows what the new cause du jour around energy is going to be. Are we going to start seeing those giant windmills? Are we all going to be putting solar panels on our roofs? And
you raise your eyebrows like those are bad things.
No, they're not. It just speaks to, and I think to Aaron's point,
I hate solar panels.
Well, they're expensive. So imagine if a government comes in and says, we're going to do this, and all of a sudden, well, and that means that your hydro rates are going to go up. It's so political, and I think it just goes back to your point, Jill, that it's like governments are, you know, why not just wrest control back in energy? Why not bring it back into the Ministry of Energy and Mining? You know, why do we have BC Ferries? Why do we have an ICBC? I mean, either these things are directly government run, and I can hear all the people screaming at me on TV going, well, you have to have arm's length, you know, authority and distance. That's fine. But then you can't have political interference, and not one party in this province over the last 30 years can claim the high ground over not interfering politically.
Exactly. I think you've nailed it. That's the problem there. So is it time just to push BC Hydro out on its own? No government interference? No?
Well, that was the route Gordon Campbell tried to go down, isn't it? But that got squashed pretty quickly. Dave Cobb came in as the CEO of Hydro, and he was told he was going to have a free reign to do
look how long he lasted.
business prudent thing, and it didn't last.
No, I guess people aren't ready for that. We're going to talk a little bit later in the show about what's going on in Abbotsford with the homeless population. I don't know if you saw the video of the homeless camp. It looks kind of like a refugee camp.
A little. I'm a little wary of making that claim in Abbotsford versus, you know, Sudan. But yes, it does look like a very low-income makeshift community. That wouldn't be a very pleasant place to live.
Mm-hmm. Are we seeing that in other parts of the Lower Mainland? I mean, have you seen that in downtown Vancouver?
I live in downtown Vancouver, and no is the short answer, although I'm sure they exist in the depths of Stanley Park. But in my, you know, day-to-day work life, no, I haven't seen it.
Mm-hmm. Has anybody come up with a progressive solution for this?
Wow, to solve homelessness? You know, multi-pronged strategies that involve all layers of government. Is there a silver bullet? No. But I think that the approach that Abbotsford is taking is dangerous. I mean, they're setting a difficult precedent in terms of talking about public space, who gets to occupy it, when, and how.
I take a slightly different view based on the fact that, you know, we covered a homeless camp back when I was living on Vancouver Island that had gone on for months and months. And so, yes, it starts as a genuine need for people to put their heads down and rest. And then it becomes a bit of a political statement, and then it becomes a movement. And then, yes, so it becomes a lightning rod. You see, politicians having to react and having to put more attention into the issue because these camps become, a lightning rod for these types of problems. But at the same time, there were health concerns, there were public health concerns, there were rats, starting to grow in this particular camp in Victoria a couple of years ago. Well, it wasn't a couple of years ago, it was more like 8 years ago. Time flies.
You're talking about in Beacon Hill Park, right?
Yeah,
and they moved in,
yes,
and the Victoria Police
it was
moved
across
in
from
and
the
carted
tree, yes,
everything
and
out.
carted, and everyone said that this was an affront and this was a terrible thing. Well, number one, this is a public space, and taxpayers have a right to enjoy their public spaces. Non-taxpayers have a right to enjoy their public spaces.
But where do these people go, Erin? I mean, Shachi brings up the point. We've seen it in lots of places. It's happened before. I'm not sure that giving 48 hours notice is the answer.
No, there's no solution there. I don't think there are easy solutions at all. The city of Abbotsford has a lot of questions to answer about how they've dealt with this issue from the beginning, from the chicken manure spreading incident right through today's 48-hour notice.
Which is why I don't trust them. Which is why I think what they're doing is dangerous, because this comes in the wake of putting chicken manure on the place where people put their head down to rest.
So now they're just being a little bit more polite. They've issued an invitation to leave.
A forcible invitation to leave.
Well, and that's the thing. Are they throwing down a gauntlet? Are they trying to send a message, or are we actually going to see a full-scale eviction in 48 hours? That's my question. I mean, people could
Which one is better?
Well, I think at some point you do have to, it galvanizes people. It would be great if in this 48 hours, the city, which by the way doesn't have a lot of credibility because of the manure issues, was bringing together their social service agencies, their churches,
They say
was
they
making
are.
a call.
They
In this
say
case,
they
the
are.
pastor's involved and
right.
says that this needs to be disbanded because of the health concerns. So, I mean, there is that.
I think health concerns is an easy way to say we don't want street people living in our community. That's a nice sanitized, pun intended, way to label the issue. I don't know if that's what's really is going on.
Right, but when I see these people downtown East Side, Abbotsford, I live in Maple Ridge. There's a homeless community, not a large one, but half a dozen people who sort of roam around my neighborhood, and there's woods there, and you see them coming in and out. We've gotten to the point where we've kind of lost empathy for these people, because I think for most of us, you think, oh, there they are again with their grocery carts and their drug paraphernalia and their roll of toilet paper and whatever else is going on. And we've stopped to say, that's somebody's kid. That's somebody's brother, that's possibly somebody's dad or somebody's mom. They've really clearly fallen on hard times, are dealing with mental health issues, and then potentially a combination of mental health issues and drug addiction.
Those are the keys, because those are the things that make them hardest to house, and I think that that's a tough thing. And the other tough piece of it is you've got this patchwork, especially in Metro Vancouver, where one mayor can say, you know what, I am going to take costs, I am going to raise taxes, I'm going to make a commitment to make things a little bit better and find more housing for the hardest to house. You've got another mayor going, I'm just going to instruct police to drive them across city limits and give it a problem there.
That's from the good old days.
I hear it's still happening.
It's still happening in Abbotsford.
Chicken shit now.
Yeah, exactly. Dara Parker, Shachi Curl, Erin MacArthur, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Still ahead, more on tackling that homeless problem in Abbotsford. We're going to talk to the pastor who says he's got a few ideas when Unfiltered continues.